because the world has bought into this Palestinian victimhood. And if you have boots on the ground and you get a chance to see what's there, the Israelis desperately want to connect with the Palestinians, to be friends, to be allies. The Israelis do as much as they can to cooperate, to give the Palestinians agricultural opportunities, marketing opportunities. They give free advice. They will go in and help them with business startups. What happens is Fatah and the Palestinian Liberation Front and the other people come in and interfere, and they essentially say, what's in it for us? There's no riches to be grabbed here. There's no money. The Israelis aren't going to pay us. There's no UN money that we can glean off the top. Therefore, we're not going to allow you to do this co-marketing opportunity with the Israelis. You have to go through a Arab broker, for example. So there's a lot of things that are sabotaged that we don't hear about until you are there, boots on the ground, and you see the cooperative effort that is at least attempted by the Israelis. So that's.
I have
a
question.
Other favorites, but that's the last I'll list for now.
Yeah, it's Terry in Illinois. Go ahead.
Well, they're trying to make things, more difficult for people to enter our country. And I was just wondering, do you find it difficult in certain countries to enter there? Have you run up into any kind of opposition, or do you have trouble at, say, where they take your passport? Or it sounds like some of the countries that you go to, can be very dangerous.
Yes, I'm 6'1" and 205 pounds, and I don't feel like I'm going to be a natural target for people trying to take advantage, like at cash machines and in the darker areas of town late at night. But most of the countries, it's fairly easy to get into. You can either get a visa ahead of time, or you can get a visa right there at the airport as you land, or you can get in the contiguous country the day before you arrive. So they generally make it pretty easy. The most difficult country that I had getting a visa on the trip that ended a year ago, when I went to 36 countries in 5 months, was India. And I really wanted to get into India rather badly because I was going to be right next door in Nepal. And the Indians made it very difficult to get a visa, and they told me, well, you can fly from Seattle down to San Francisco. You can spend 3 days down there. We'll review your application. So you incur the flight expense, you incur the hotel expense and all that, and they wouldn't guarantee me that they would give me a visa at the end. And I just went, I'll get to India another time. It should be so much easier than that, and it generally is. It's not that difficult. Generally, what they want is bakshish. They want American dollars. So they're going to charge you. And they have a reciprocal agreement. If the U.S. makes it hard for their countrymen to get in here in the U.S., they're generally going to make it a little bit more difficult. But the American greenback always speaks louder than the restrictions most of the time. They want those dollars. North Korea is a prime example.
That's true worldwide, isn't it, Lawrence?
I'm sorry, Rich, say again, please.
That's true worldwide, isn't it? The American dollar is highly coveted worldwide in virtually all countries.
Yeah, we keep hearing about how the Chinese yuan is going to be the monetary choice of the international monetary system. But in honesty, and you already know from our previous interview that I tend to speak very plainly, is nobody trusts the Chinese.
Mm-hmm.
They still trust America and the American dollar because they know that we are out to spread capitalism. We're not to spread our own particular brand of capitalism, for example. That we'll do business with almost anybody, including our former enemies in Vietnam and China and so forth. And they don't have that level of familiarity or comfort yet with the Chinese. So I have to say, in all honesty, when I went to China, I found the Chinese to be very agreeable, very friendly, very warm people, and more than anything, they just want to be part of the world community. They don't really care about the political system that they have. In fact, the government was threatening to institute more propaganda and more political training with people because they weren't speaking the party line quite as much as they have. I wrote a chapter in my book entitled "Show Me the Money."
Yeah.
And that was China, and that's modern day China. Is people just want to be part of the world community, and they want opportunities to make money. So when you get over there, they're very friendly, but you're going to hit 65 times with, let's do a deal together. What do you do? How can we form a business together? How can you get me involved in a business? What ideas do you have for me to form a business? Very, very, very material and money-driven right now.
Very entrepreneurial, absolutely.
Very entrepreneurial. Better word yet, yes.
Well, I know. I remember probably back in the 80s, they said that, a person from the United States could go over to China, and if they had a suitcase full of, like, say, Wrangler or Levi blue jeans, you could sell them for $200 a piece over there. Over here, they were
Russia.
probably selling for $20. I'd always heard it was China.
Is this Terry again?
Yeah.
Yeah, Terry, that was Russia. China didn't have that level of income at that time in 1980.
Really?
They do now. They're rapidly approaching the number of millionaires and billionaires that the United States has. But in 1980, the deal was you could go over to Russia, and I have a sister-in-law who actually did that. When she got married to my brother, she came over here, and my brother lives in Moscow, and she came over here and loaded up with Mary Kay products and Donna Karan New York products and shoes and jeans and stuff like that, went back to Moscow and just made bank with that.
Mm-hmm.
But the Russians had the disposable income. The Chinese did not have the disposable income until the last 15 years or so.
Well, I'd like to follow up with you on something we discussed in the first show that you were on, and this is touching back on Rwanda that we talked about earlier. How about the 60 orphans in Rwanda? What's the latest with them, and how can listeners donate? Can you tell us a little about them?
Oh, God, Rich, thank you. Thank you. Bless you for asking. I had a chance bus encounter in Rwanda with a pastor, and he invited me to stay over at his compound. And when I was there, he then introduced me to some orphans that he had been taking care of and his fellow church members. And these kids were sleeping on the floor, on dirt floor. And they had no blankets, they had no pillows, they had no games, they had no toys. They were eating every third day. They had one set of clothes. Some of them had shoes. And it really touched my heart. And I'm not prior to that trip, I'm not what you would call a sob sister. I'm not one of those that would have been, God, let's round up the troops and get as much money as we can for this. But when you see it in person, it's completely different. It's just completely different. It's so sad to see these kids huddled against each other for warmth on dirt. And so when I left, I gave them a certain amount of money for some shoes and to get solar lights, because their day ended at 5 o'clock when it got dark. And so they had lights where they could carry on into the dark and tell stories with each other. And I got them a chalkboard so that they could begin lessons in whatever they wanted lessons in. I got them some clothes and then money for food and also a sewing machine so they could repair their clothes and perhaps do some entrepreneurial things. And it just went on from there. And Facebook friends started chipping in. And the next go-round is we got doors and windows for the essential, their church is kind of like a cattle pen more than anything. So we got doors and windows so that they could lock out the mosquitoes and the cold and the rain. And then the next fundraising trip on Facebook and with friends and acquaintances and generous people who call in was to get them beds. So we got them 12 beds for the primary kids that they take care of and are there all the time. And that included mattresses and blankets and pillows. And then there have been some been contributing monthly for food because they're always short on food. They just don't have the same economics over there, and the government doesn't chip in the way that the government will chip in for orphans in the United States. The government just either does not have the wherewithal or doesn't feel the obligation to pitch in the same way. And please keep in mind that there are disproportionately many more orphans in Rwanda because of the genocide and because of the AIDS epidemic that has resulted in the last 25 years. And so you'll get parents who will have children, and then the parents will die of AIDS, and the children be afflicted with AIDS, but they manage to survive. And so there's lots and lots of orphans, and they're just not the structure to take care of them. And so these poor kids will wander around at night, and this orphanage essentially started with these kids taking themselves into this church for the night and just having a place to be out of the rain and away from predators. So the latest project is to try to get them a new orphanage, because the orphanage they have is essentially a cattle pen with a metal roof, and they're being rented, and the landlord is taking advantage of them. He's continually giving them rent increases, or saying, well, I hadn't really intended this to be used as an orphanage. I can put it to a higher and better use and get more money, and so you guys need to be out. And they're kind of doing that game. And so it'll cost somewhere between $30,000 and $50,000 to get a building built for them, and that's the next project, is to get.
Is there a crowdsourcing fund set up? Do you have a GoFundMe that people can go to, or a PayPal address that people can send to for these orphans?
Rich, I did earlier. I don't now. I'm going to form it shortly. I've been very, very busy writing the book and then trying to promote the book, but I'm going to form one. For right now, donations can be made via PayPal, and it'll be to the Freestyle World Traveler Benevolent Fund. And I think the way to get into that via that might be able to be input into PayPal, but I think the easiest way is just via email. If I remember how money is sent via PayPal, and it's sent to email.
Right, it can be done with email, yes.
Yeah, and so it would be to my email, or, for example, and I'll give that in just a second, or somebody could email me directly and just say, how can I send you a check? How can I make a donation? And so the email address to reach me directly or to send money via PayPal would be Cenotto5th@yahoo.com, and I'll spell that out. So that's my last name, CENOTTO, then the THE, the number 5, and then TH @yahoo.com. Cenotto5th@yahoo.com. And contributions go completely to the orphans. There is no admin expense. There is no fundraising expense. There is no commissions. There is no payment to anybody, and certainly not to me. Basically, all the money that is paid gets augmented by me, and I add to it and pay all the fees for that money to be sent to Rwanda via Western Union, for example. So people don't have to worry. This isn't like the American Red Cross, where 80–90% of the donation goes into admin and salaries, and 10% goes to projects in the U.S. This is 100% plus of the money goes to the orphans.
Well, that's great. That's great.
People can be rest assured that there is no siphoning, that it's all going to a very good cause. And
Lawrence, I'd also, while we're discussing this, I'd like to touch upon your blog. Your blog is called Freestyle World Traveler at blogspot.com, if I recall correctly.
Exactly, Rich.
Can you tell us a little about the pros and cons of traveling freestyle?
Yeah, and actually that's a delightful question. That's one that I love talking about. The pros and cons of traveling freestyle. That is my style. Freestyle means you basically have no set plan. Doesn't mean you don't do a lot of research. You don't have an idea of where you want to go, but it means it's not set in stone, and you're more likely to listen to the locals.
Right.
For example, this last trip, I went to 36 countries in 5 months. Well, it started off going to like 6 or 7 countries in what was going to be maybe a month. And the trip just morphed. And it morphed by listening to locals and by adding on to the project, adding on to the trip.
Well, you pointed out in the last show that locals are always your best source for special sites.
Always, not only special sites, but also where to eat and where to stay. I stay in hostels, for example. I don't like staying in hotels. I don't think interesting people stay at hotels. Interesting people tend to stay in hostels. Hostels also have music pits, and they got little food preparation areas, and they have people from all over the world who are staying there and are anxious to share travel stories with you, anxious to trade war stories, whereas my experience with hotels is a lot of times people want to be isolated, shut in, and do their work on their computer, and they really don't want to cross paths with a stranger sitting across the table from them trading war stories over dinner. So back to freestyle. Freestyle is essentially lining up your airline segments based on research that you've done, and you figure out for this set of countries, here's all the things that I want to see, and then you figure out a timeline. How much time will this take? And you never know what routing you're going to go. The routing is really dependent upon good fortune and what people you meet on the path and all those things. But okay, this period from this country to this country will take 2 weeks. So you set your airline segments up 2 weeks plus 1 day apart. And then you just travel, and it could be by camel, it could be by donkey, it could be by boat, it could be by river cruiser, could be by plane. You just never know. I had 10,000 miles on the ground in Africa alone on this latest trip. And that was a lot of 15-passenger vans that in reality ended up being 35-passenger vans, because they packed the kids in there, and they packed the chickens and the goats, and and the driver also pays a fine to the local police to be able to violate their limit. It's a big joke. You're driving down the road, and about 2 miles after they start, they pull off to the side of the road. Everybody in the van starts laughing. And they know that they're pulling off to pay off the cop, and then the cop will walk up with a new sticker saying your new capacity for this vehicle is 35 now instead of 17. And that happens over and over and over in Africa. The other thing that they do, incidentally, is they don't start at a designated time. You may show up at 8 o'clock, but unless that van is full, you may not leave till 11 or 12. So you could be sitting there for 4 hours cooling your heels until it fills up, and then you take off. And any public conveyance that takes off at a regular scheduled time is very, very rare. I only ran into that in Burundi and Rwanda. The rest of the countries, it was only when it was full. So freestyle, the shortcomings are you don't know when you're going to leave sometimes, and that museum that you had planned to visit in the afternoon, when you knew it was a 3-hour trip, it wasn't a 3-hour trip, it was a 9-hour trip. That's one of the shortcomings. The beautiful part of it is you get to see things that you had never counted on, that are not in the guidebooks, that the locals told you about, that you saw, and you have some absolutely amazing conversations with people riding on chicken buses that are not only world travelers themselves, but also locals who will tell you about their life. And a lot of that works its way into my books.